Tom Smalley, welcome into Forever Forward.
Thanks for having me, man. This is exciting.
Yeah, man. I'm excited to dive into a bunch of stuff today. Look, you are a good man. You're a multiple-time gold medalist in American weightlifting, but you're also a mental health advocate. So I think let's start there, and then we can work our way back. Could you talk a little bit about what you've struggled with in the past?
Yeah, definitely. Dude, it's so funny. First off, it's so funny when you asked me to come on your podcast because, growing up, going to Ward, you were the man. And then, I was, so quiet. Yeah. And so reserved because I was going through so much and I couldn't play sports. It just was such a down time, especially freshman through junior year that I really didn't have a friend group, in that realm.
Yeah.
And it's just so funny how things come full circle and stuff.
Well, what I think is ironic, and maybe we'll get into this, is maybe you thought I was quote unquote the man, but I was dealing with a bunch of stuff too.
Right.
Things that are now kind of coming to the surface that I've just now gotten the courage to start to talk about. But it must have felt somewhat isolating for you at the time, going through this stuff, knowing look, I'm a cool dude, but I just have some demons I'm fighting right now.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I was diagnosed with OCD when I was 16. I was a sophomore in high school. And I mean, I had always struggled with anxiety and even as a child, and depression. But I mean, you think about, I'm 26. When I was a child, 6 to 8 years old, nobody was talking about that. I mean, 20 years difference is, the progress we've made with mental health stigma and awareness is unbelievable, actually.
Yeah.
And obviously has a long ways to go still. But so, it was almost very taboo to even think a child could be depressed.
Yeah.
They don't have feelings. They don't, they're a child.
Absolutely.
And so I think what happened was I grew up like many Fairfield County kids, right? Played sports, had friends. I think a lot of those friends were, surface level because, you can't make those connections when you're going through so much and nobody knows about it.
Of course.
Right? And then it was freshman year when I was playing basketball and, wanted to play football, wanted to play sports. And I was really starting to struggle with the compulsion aspect.
Okay.
And these thoughts were so intrusive. And, with OCD, what people think it isn't what it is.
And I think the word OCD gets thrown around a lot,
right?
When it probably shouldn't.
It's just used as an adjective.
Right.
Right. Just as similar as someone saying because they're changing moods, they're bipolar, or because they can't focus, they have ADHD.
Totally.
And it's dude, just because you do that doesn't mean you're diagnosed with this.
Totally.
Right? This is a clinical diagnosis. And so it's possible for people to have OCD tendencies or obsessive tendencies, right? That can be human nature, but when it starts debilitating your life and taking time out of your life, and then you're clinically diagnosed with it, it's a whole different beast.
Totally.
And so what happened was, I was having these dark thoughts, violent, intrusive thoughts. And from 8th grade to probably sophomore year, I was really, they really stepped up. And so it's a 3-year span of me feeling absolutely isolated of oh my gosh, I'm having these dark thoughts, these intrusive thoughts. I'm the only one on this planet that has these thoughts.
Of course.
And I'm a bad person.
Right.
Yeah, right. And so obviously I wasn't going to talk about them because if I was actually the only one that had these thoughts,
they'd throw you in prison.
Right. They're going to throw me away.
Yeah.
Right. And so finally it got to the point where it started, taking over my life and, I was doing compulsions to try to combat those thoughts. And that's when it becomes OCD. So, I should probably just explain, what OCD is in general, right?
Yeah. And so you have the thoughts and you do the compulsions to try and manage the thoughts.
Right.
What were the compulsions that you were doing and how many repetitions were you doing of those compulsions?
Yeah, definitely. No, it's a really good question. So essentially OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, for people that don't know what it is, because it is thrown around like an adjective, right?
Yeah.
You have the obsessions, which there's so many different subtypes, right? You have people that suffer from sexual intrusive thoughts, violent intrusive thoughts, scrupulosity, like faith in OCD, health anxiety, contamination. So mainly what people see in the media is germs, organization,
doorknobs,
right? But you don't see people talking about violent intrusive thoughts or sexual intrusive thoughts or the darker ones, because people are afraid if I went up to a random person on the street and said, "Hey, I'm having this thought that I'm going to lose control and kill somebody."
Yep.
And they don't know what OCD is. they're going to take it seriously.
Or that I'm going to drive my car off a cliff.
Right. They're going to take that seriously because people with OCD know that it's an irrational thought.
Yeah.
But their brain can't quite decipher because of the lack of chemical imbalance that it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So what they do, what OCD does is tries to feed that anxiety cycle. And so that's where the compulsions come in.
Yep.
And so compulsions could be, obviously what you see in media, right? Hand washing, organizing things. But like, Khloe Kardashian posts on her YouTube channel, like, oh, I love having OCD because my closet's so organized.
So ridiculous.
And it's like, OCD isn't fun or quirky. Like it's like people that have OCD don't enjoy doing the compulsions. Yeah. Like it is absolutely debilitating and demoralizing because you're caught in this cycle that you feel like you're trapped. You can't get out of. And so for me, it was just called, the subtype was kind of called just right OCD, right? And so just right OCD would be like, if I picked up this can, I'd put it back down. And if it didn't feel just right and I didn't have a good thought to counteract the bad thoughts, I would do it again. And then I would do it again.
And just right would be it needs to land at the same time,
right? And it has to feel just right. It's like it's something that's specific to OCD.
Okay, and
pretty much you'd have, and it, like as I'm putting it down, I have to have a good thought. Like so, if I was worried I'm gonna lose control and kill somebody, or lose control and hurt somebody, or hurt myself, right? I would have to put down this thought and say I'm not gonna hurt anybody, over and over and over again. And so what happens is it's never just right. Very rarely does it land and you say it and you don't have the bad thought and you have the good thought, right? Because if I told you to not think of something,
you're going to think about
it more, right? And so what happens is that those minutes turn into hours. So at my worst, I was doing 12 to 14 hours of compulsions a day. Like it's funny, remember Mr. Ebling?
Yeah.
Mr. Ebling found me pacing in the hallway one day because I was counting my steps. Because my safe number was 5, so I'd count in 5s, and I'd end up going to like 100 and 500, and
like if you got past 100, then it's like, oh, now I got to go to 500.
Yeah,
wow,
yeah. And so like I went to the bathroom during class, and he found me one day, and like obviously I was on a 504 plan IEP, and like the teachers were very well aware of like what was going on, and so and I think that's why I appreciate Ward. Like Jeff Saganos is someone that I'm still super close with, and like talk to monthly. Like they took care of me because like I would literally get to the point where like I was just counting my steps and like not focusing on what was going around me.
I think there's definitely something to be said though, for as difficult as this was for you. I mean, you graduated, you got through high school. That must have been exponentially more difficult for you than it was for others.
Oh gosh, yeah, man. I mean, I was a really bad student, obviously.
I mean, how could you be?
It wasn't really like I was a poor student. It was more I had no capability or capacity to worry about it, right? You have 12 to 14 hours of compulsions a day. That takes away more than half the day. And then, you have sleep, school, homework, trying to like have any resemblance of a social life, which was just never going to happen. And then sleep should take up 8 of those extra 10 hours. So it's like, you're not getting any of that.
So really you had no free time.
No, honestly, it was all bogged down by OCD. And I was missing days of school at a time. I would be late to school all the time. I would be in the counseling center during classes. Like I was missing a lot of class because I just couldn't get there. My therapist did home visits at some points because I couldn't leave the house.
Really?
And it was that bad. And it's so funny because like realistically, like nobody really knew. Like when you think about it, like
because the compulsions can be even so subtle that people that don't know about OCD don't pick up on it.
And people that have OCD are so embarrassed and ashamed by it that like I would hide them.
Really?
And people would be like not really think anything of it because it was kind of like, I was good at hiding it. I'd practiced because I'd hid it from my family for so many years.
Yeah. Who knew about this in the beginning? Anybody or
my family, a few friends, but really, really just my family and the teachers were really the people that really knew about it.
Was it embarrassing for you to have to admit to yourself that this is something you were going through?
Totally. For a while, it was like, why me? Right? It's like, it's that like victim mentality of, why did God pick me for this battle? And why is this my cross to bear? And why do all these other dudes and, get to play football and go have fun and go to parties and, have this abundant social life and this great high school experience. And I'm here like just hoping I even graduate or even get to the next grade.
Yeah.
I was failing out of classes, freshman, sophomore year. I really didn't turn around till middle of junior year is like when we were like, because I had people telling me like college is just not even in the picture.
Really?
And like, obviously in our area, right? What's the expectation?
It's college.
It's you go to high school and you go to a 4-year school.
Of course.
And like, what I've learned is like, that's just not, it shouldn't be the expectation. And there's so many different ways to build a life, but that's just the norm in Fairfield County, right? And so to me, like, I was a colossal failure.
To yourself.
To myself, because I was like, and to my family, because I was like, man, if I don't make it to this point, I didn't do what I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
And it's like, why is that a thing? Like, what is my supposed to do? Right? Like,
I think you've identified exactly what you're supposed to do. It's ironic because it has a lot to do with your struggles. And maybe we'll get into your mission in a little bit, but you said you turned it around maybe around the junior year mark. Was there a moment for you or help that you sought out that sort of like began to tip the scales in your favor?
Yeah. I mean, I think it really just comes down to evidence-based and like results-driven therapy.
So sought out therapy.
Yeah. So pretty much what happened was, it got so bad that I wanted to end my life. I told my parents I didn't want to live anymore. I didn't see a point in living. Nothing was ever going to be, worth it to me.
Yeah.
I mean, like, hindsight, like, imagine being a parent and having your son look you in the eyes and tell you that you don't want to live. Like, that is, I can't even imagine what that felt like for them.
But you were in that moment. That was your honest
thought. That was how I was feeling. Like, none of what was going on was worth it to me.
Yeah.
And so it got so bad that my mom, I could have gone into an inpatient facility somewhere. But my mom, and I think that's where I was probably headed, right? But my mom really didn't want me to like miss a huge chunk of school and have to stay back because I was already older for my grade.
Yeah.
And so, you're just searching for options. You're searching for options, and I think it's an emergency at this point to her.
Yeah.
And so she got on the phone with a clinician who has been my treatment provider and my therapist for 10 years now.
Wow, still to this day?
Fucking nuts, dude.
It's crazy.
That's Aunt Amy.
Yeah.
That's my Aunt Amy.
Yeah.
That's what I call her.
Shout out Aunt Amy.
Aunt Amy. But she didn't have any space for an extra client. And my mom left a voicemail, and I, from what I heard, like, my mom begged and, was crying on the voicemail. Like, my son is at his end. Like, This is like, we are out of options. Like, I don't know where to go, because a lot of people say they treat OCD, but there's a very, very specific type of treatment for OCD. It's called exposure response prevention therapy. So it's ERP. It's a form of cognitive behavioral therapy of CBT. And so what exposure response therapy does, and this is like kind of a misconception of what people think like I do in therapy. Like, they think I'm, I always give the reference of like Good Will Hunting when he's like laying on his back, like
just
seeing
chatting.
skyrockets in flight. like my therapy is not like that. Like, we're doing active exposure work where I'm exposing myself to the unbelievable, debilitating fear of my obsession and sitting with the discomfort of not doing any compulsions.
In the beginning, that must have been terrifying.
Awful. Because you're literally going to therapy thinking like you're going to leave. Like, I would leave there literally exhausted.
Probably feeling maybe even worse.
Escalated. Like, anxiety was like at a 10.
Unbelievable.
Right? And so like, but that's what really, because over time you learn how to cope with that anxiety that you feel when you don't do a compulsion.
Yeah.
And it's that patterning of like breaking that OCD cycle. So with OCD, the obsession spikes your anxiety.
Okay.
And then they want what OCD wants, because it attacks everything we love. It's never going to attack something that we don't care about, because then we're not going to feed the compulsion. And so you do the compulsion and it dives right back down. But then it goes right back up because you have OCD and the obsessions are always there.
Well, what I was going to say earlier is you're like, I would rarely get it just right? But even when you got it just right, you'd only be fine for like 10 seconds.
Exactly.
Right?
Like,
and then there's a new thought.
Exactly.
Right.
And so then it would go, because I'm doing something new, I'm walking somewhere else. And so it's always there. And so you have to learn how to cope.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're not going to get your time back.
Yeah.
And so it would spike up and then go back down. Spike up, go back down. And so what ERP does is it allows you to spike up, and then over time learn that it goes down. The anxiety, decreases
without the compulsion.
Without the compulsion. But that doesn't mean it takes 5 minutes for that anxiety to decrease, especially at first. Now, sometimes I'm only anxious for 10 minutes, or like, I'm able to cope a little bit easier than some other thoughts. It might be a couple hours that I'm a little bit anxious about, but I still am able to go about my day. And, for when I first started, it was like, hey, you're going to do this compulsion, or you're not going to do this compulsion, and then you're probably going to be anxious the rest of the night, maybe tomorrow, and maybe the next day. Like when I see you again for therapy, and you said to sit with that. And obviously, like, the combination of ERP and the medication, the medication isn't to treat the anxiety, or to treat the OCD rather. It's to treat the anxiety of what you're feeling.
Right.
And so that's kind of a misconception of like, hey, antidepressants can help OCD. They help the anxiety that you feel from not doing the compulsions. Right. But it doesn't fix OCD. Right?
Is there anything that does fix or help with the OCD?
Really, the ERP. Okay. So, the messaging that we want to present, as the lead advocate for the IOCDF is that, like, you can have a really fulfilling life with OCD. Is it chronic? Yeah, you're going to technically still always have OCD, but like, it doesn't mean you can't live a life that's like, that you get your time back and have fulfillment and are able to do everything you want to do.
Yeah, and I think there's a real message of hope in this, because at one time you probably never thought that you could sit here and have like a normal conversation and not feel like you had to tap the table or pick up and put the can back down, like, and have these crazy thoughts. But
100%.
Even still, it sounds like this is something that you're always going to struggle with.
Right. And some days are better than others, but like what I've learned is that, like, hey, we don't want our message to be like, oh, you can survive with OCD. We want your message like to be, hey, you can thrive with OCD, right? Like that, you don't want that to be defy the odds. Like, in the beginning, like, but like if you have results-driven treatment of ERP, which is what our goal is, to get more people treated right and diagnosed sooner, the odds are in your favor to live a life that you feel is worth living.
Totally. And it sounds like the messaging is like, this isn't going to always be your burden to carry, your cross to bear. Like, yeah, you might always have it, but you will live a full and happy life. This is just going to be a small piece of it. And that's okay.
Right.
And I feel like, for me, as somebody who has struggled severely with mental health in the past, which maybe we'll get into, maybe we won't, it has actually, in some weird way, I think, provided me some benefits, honestly, in my life. Would you say that having OCD has brought you any silver linings or any understandings about your brain and yourself?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's brought me self-awareness aspects.
Oh, so
just
much.
Like always examining, like, from a, trying to like zoom out and like just kind of understand like where I'm at in life, where I could do better, what I can control, what I can't control.
Yep.
And then just, I think relationships makes you value relationships more. It makes you understand how to communicate differently with different people. Empathy. I think empathy is one of my strongest suits. And I think that's something without OCD, I don't think I'd have the same empathetic mindset that I do with having OCD. So like, it's funny because, as debilitating as it was and, how much I had to go through, I still would do it all over again.
Really?
Because like, and it's been a thing for me of not making my OCD me, and like, I'm Tom with OCD, not like I am my OCD.
But
like,
that.
Because like it can easily become your identity, especially when you're advocating so much. But like, I want to show people that, hey, like, I went through this, I still go through things, but this is how I've operated and been able to live a life that's full of purpose.
Right.
And so I think without that OCD and without that struggle, I wouldn't really understand, what purpose is.
I love that.
Right. And I think having that struggle, like, everybody suffers to some degree. Right?
Life is suffering to some degree.
Right. And I think learning how to suffer, like, that has been like the biggest gift to me, because it's like, you don't have to suffer, in silence and in pain.
Yeah.
You can suffer with people, and you can endure things with people and lean on people and understand that, like, it's okay to ask for help. And
yep.
So I think it just has taught me so much in that sense that I wouldn't trade it.
You've also become a pretty outspoken advocate of OCD, which, by the way, thank you for that work, because it's important. It's arguably one of the more important things that I think anybody can do, is be an advocate for mental health, especially in men. What was this flip from, having it and dealing with it to feeling so empowered in yourself to be willing to tell your story and actually help others?
Dude, crazy how I got into it, actually. So I was 17. It was like a year after I was diagnosed. And my therapist, Aunt Amy, was shout out Amy. She gets a lot of she gets a lot of shout outs on every podcast episode.
No, she's doing the Lord's work.
Yeah,
honestly.
she really is.
Yeah.
She was like, hey, there's a OCD Connecticut awareness event at Yale's Child Study Center in New Haven. Would you be open to speaking at it? And I was like, speaking at it for what? Like I shouldn't speak at it. And they're like, they want someone with, real life experience. And so I go, okay, like I'll do it. And that turned into like me being in front of like just like probably 30, 35 people, like just almost like a keynote of like, hey, this has been my life with OCD at 17 years old. Like,
but what was that like, telling your story in public? Was it scary?
It was scary at first, but then it was kind of like, oh, this is kind of cool.
Was it kind of empowering?
It was like, this feels good. Like, and obviously I'll talk about this, but like advocacy has been a large part of my recovery.
Yeah.
Right. And being able to serve, right. Like I've talked about off camera, like that's my mission.
Yeah.
And so that led to me going to the International OCD Conference, which is every year by the ICDF. This year it's in Orlando. I'm on 3 different panels, running 2 different support groups. So like I'm really active at those. I've been to probably 10 now, and I've spoken at probably 9 of them, the past 9. And so that year I went to my first International OCD Conference. It was in LA.
Okay.
And I went with my dad, and we just went as people attending.
Oh, okay.
So it's usually for like individuals, it's for anybody with OCD, dealing with OCD, or have a loved one with OCD. And then there's a bunch of clinicians there too, looking for educational, opportunities and education and continuing education. And so we went out to LA, me and my dad, and it was unbelievable because I went there not having any expectation and just kind of like, I'm going to be in a place where everybody deals with OCD.
Okay.
And like for that, it's like, you don't have that anywhere around here where you get a group of people.
True.
Where I'm in my first support group, I'll never forget. And I share a thought of like, I'm so afraid that one of my obsessions is that my family is going to die in a car accident. And I worry about it every second, every day. And then 9 hands go up and go, I have the same thought. And then you're like, oh shit.
You're like other people actually feel this way?
Yeah, it's crazy. So then, I start building this community there, and it's like probably the best 3 days of my, like the past 17 years for me, because it's like, I feel at home.
Yeah.
You feel connected to people that go through similar struggles.
Yeah.
I'm in support groups. And then finally it's the last day of the conference, and they ask for like attendees to share, a moment of what they struggled with and go up to the mic, in the middle of the room. And I go up to the mic in front of the panel, and I talk for 5-6 minutes, and everybody just stands up and claps. And I was like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Like, I just was honest.
Yeah.
And so, I met a lot of people there. And then as I'm leaving that room, my really, really good friend, Chris Tronson, who's an individual with OCD, he's now on the board of directors at the RCDF, but he's also he lives a double life. He's also an on-air reporter for like the red carpet. Like he was literally interviewing like Leonardo DiCaprio. Like 6 months ago. Like,
okay.
I'll show you his Instagram.
Okay.
Shout out Chris. He's like the most amazing human being. Super humble. He also is the president of the affiliate program for OCD Southern California. He has a private practice out there where he treats OCD himself now, which is amazing. Like he suffered with it, has an unbelievable story of hope, and now treats it himself. But he was, not too far into his career of advocacy, but he had started this young adult track for the conference, and he was kind of spearheading it. And so he follows me out of this session and like finds me on the staircase. He goes, "Hey, do you want to speak at the next conference?" And I was like, "Okay."
Really?
And so pretty much that's how I got roped into speaking. I spoke the next year in DC.
Yep.
And then I spoke the next year in Boston. And then I spoke the next year in Denver. And then I was speaking at all these events. And then so as I started speaking at the national events, I started getting into schools.
Yep.
And started getting into local events too. And then I started, my name was out there more. And then I got into, this is really when my advocacy took off, my platform took off, was I got into a situation in college. So I got to college, which is, was remarkable in its own right.
Right.
And then, I got to Siena, and I was working as a student assistant for the men's basketball team because I wanted to stay involved with sports. I was like, maybe I want to coach. I was super open about my OCD there, obviously, because I was, you look up my name at that point. You could find some stuff about my battle with OCD.
Yep.
I was doing webinars, invited to things like that.
Yep.
So I was publicly advocating, and I did a project with a friend that was a film major, and he made a documentary about me living with OCD.
Really?
And we released it, did well, like a few hundred views or whatever. And then I had opened up to the coaches I was working for about my OCD, and what happened next was like the wildest thing in the world. So I opened up to those coaches, and they pretty much made fun of and bullied me about my OCD every day.
Oh my! I thought you were gonna say like this was some inspirational, crazy.
No. So like I got, you climb that mountain in high school, like, and then you get to college, and you're like, shit, fresh start, man. Like I can be something now. And then all of a sudden, you're just put down every day. And so I got to that point. I went through it freshman year. I was like, oh, it's Division I basketball. Like I gotta have a tough skin.
Nah, fuck.
And then literally, I'm at the OCD conference with my community. The best part about the conference, and it's what I look forward to the most every year, is in Orlando. I know this summer in July, it's going to be like 1 a.m. We're going to be in the lobby, like at a table, just chatting, because we all see each other once a year. And so it's those talks at night that are like, you've done like 3 sessions. It's emotionally draining too, because there's so much emotion into it, and we're all just sharing kind of like recaps of how our year's been, what we've been struggling with as advocates, and like kind of like, being a presentation of recovery, but also still struggling ourselves. And so we're just talking, and I'm talking about, what these coaches are saying to me. And then I'm like, yeah. And like this coach, calls me the next school shooter, tells me that I need to take my crazy pills, tells me that I need to not tell girls that I take medication because they won't want to date me, or like, and tells me that I belong in an insane asylum. I got kicked off a bus once because he, called me a retard or whatever. And they were like, what? And everybody kind of froze and was like, that's terrible. And to me, like, I had just been kind of pushing it off as like, I just gotta have a thick skin. Like it's Division I, it's Division I sports. Like
I could see how you might have that mindset yourself,
because that's just, that's what, especially as males, has been taught to us, for generations, and by the media, so that's when I realized, like, I got to do something about this. Like, that's bad.
Yeah.
Like I'm getting really mistreated. And so pretty much what happened was, I told my parents, and they were like, what? He said, what? And so like, I was getting bullied for freshman, sophomore year, and just kind of putting up with it. But I was relapsing in the moment too, because obviously it was taking away all my power of recovery.
Yeah.
And it was bringing on more stress because it's a stressful situation. And so crazy. I was good friends with the president of the school, because he was a friar. I'd have dinners with him, like in the dining hall and stuff. And like, they were just always around campus or whatever. And so, and I was in like campus ministry, so they knew me and stuff. So, I talked to him, not realizing he was the president of the school.
Yeah.
Because he was asking me, about certain things about the program. And like, I was just kind of like talking about like what I was going through, thinking I was confiding in somebody, just like, about what the name calling and that kind of stuff. And then the next day I get it, my phone's blowing up in my 6 to 9 p.m. class. And, I was very much the same as I was at Ward. I wasn't popular. I wasn't, my phone wasn't blowing up. And so I'm like, all right, I got to step out of class. And it's like a dozen calls from like my family, my friends, and like reporters from like the Albany Times Union, Sports Illustrated, USA Today, ESPN. And it's literally, the first text I see is somebody sent me an article of blah, 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 basketball coach under investigation for psychological abuse towards student manager with OCD.
Holy shit.
And I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, so the president obviously had to report it. And like me not going there to like tell everybody, but like the president talked to Title IX, and like obviously like he was concerned about like what was going on, and that blew up into a news story.
Wow.
And so pretty much what happened was, it was like, I'm 21, I'm thrust into this spotlight of like, I didn't want to be a whistleblower, like I wasn't trying to tell anybody, like I was going to keep quiet about it still, but they were also losing a lot that season. So it was like, when you're winning, everything masks everything, right? And so when you're losing, now it's a problem, that's not how it should be, but that's the way sports works, right? And so I'm all of a sudden, all right, my name wasn't in the story, but put 2 and 2 together.
Yeah, people know.
I had just released a documentary about living with OCD. It was all over my social medias. And there's 2 student managers, one that doesn't have OCD and didn't just release a documentary.
And one that does.
And one that does. Yeah. And the other one is someone that I live with now.
Okay.
We're best friends to this day. And so obviously I was easily identifiable, right? And so that is when my platform just like, it was like, at that point you have an option. It's, I can be what that coach says I am and try to get revenge on him and be like angry and spiteful, or I can, use that national platform as an opportunity to spread awareness.
Yeah.
And like with the IOCDF's help and the, advising from my, my family and stuff and talking about it with my family, that's obviously what I did.
Yeah.
And so that's when, it was that year I was given the Hero Award by the IOCDF in Dawson, Texas. And that's when it just like all just started to come together. I had a bigger platform and it was just like, oh shit, like this is real. Like I can use this testimony, this story, because it wasn't just high school. It was like all of a sudden now I was getting, discriminated against for it, and I was getting bullied for it, which was never part of my experience beforehand. I was looked at weird, but like it wasn't like, hey, you're being bullied for it. And then
you were kind of suffering in silence,
right? Exactly. And now it's like, oh, I'm in public, and so now I'm going out in Albany to you go out to a house party in college, and now I'm known as like, oh, you're the kid that was abused. Oh, you're the kid that was abused. You go to the team in that area was big, so it's like you go to any restaurant, it's like, oh, you're that dude.
People recognize you.
Yeah. So I can't like hide from it.
Yeah.
And so obviously now it's gotten a lot better where the coach forcefully resigned, and I worked. That's also where I got into performance, because during that time I was being bullied. The head strength coach, Ian Farrell, took me under his wing and realized like I loved training, and like I loved physiology, I loved like mental performance, I loved all the human performance side. And then I started being an intern in the sports performance department after that whole situation.
I see.
Like again, it's the same thing we were talking about off camera. Like the universe puts you in places you're supposed to be, and I firmly believe that, right? Like, and sometimes it sends you these alarms, like, hey, this is not meant for you. Like we're putting you here because this is what's meant for you.
Yeah.
Like you're supposed to be here. And so like that was a situation where like, yeah, it was painful. Yeah, I suffered, but like that led me to my career. Right. Like, because without that, I'm probably still interested in coaching basketball or not knowing what I really want to do.
Yeah.
And because of that, I realized my mission was to serve others in the OCD community and serve others in all other aspects of my life. And like I told you, like passion can burn out, but like purpose lasts forever. Like my purpose is to serve. Yeah. And that's what those situations I was in high school and college are what drove me to realize that was my purpose.
So you talked a little bit about how you met the strength coach, right? And he kind of took you under your wing. It's so funny now thinking back to high school, you then versus you now. You come in the studio, you can barely fit through the door. You're a big dude. You look good. You've been weightlifting competitively for some time.
Yeah.
How has that been as far as like something to really empower you and as almost an outlet for some of this stuff? What do you think weightlifting has done for your life?
Dude, the sport of Olympic weightlifting has changed my life so much. And it's funny how I actually got started in it pretty late. Like, so like I was in the weight room in college a bunch with Ian, like learning stuff, and like, I think back now and I'm like, shit, man, I wish I found the weight room in high school.
Yeah,
it wasn't the same though. Like the importance of it, like it wasn't placed the same. Like people did it, but like I don't remember it being so important. Whereas now, like people understand the importance of it more.
Oh, and it's so important, not just for athletes, but
would have been so much better. Like
also, it's and we'll talk about the mental side too. But
yeah,
not only is it the physical side, right? Being fit is a lot about what's up 100%.
Here. And so essentially, I gained strength, through college. I mean, I went into college 155 pounds soaking wet. I left college about 185.
All muscle though.
Yeah, I came home the end of my junior year. My mom was like, what the hell happened? Yeah. Like, who ate my son? And like, so that was always our family joke. And then like, after I went and got my master's, obviously at Merrimack in exercise science, and my bachelor's was in psych, my exercise science master's, and then I went and worked as a college strength coach at Tufts, St. Anselm, and Wagner. And when I came back to the area, to Clifton Park, I was working as director of performance at a training facility, and a weightlifting coach came in to see the new facility and just to kind of talk shop with me. He was a national level coach.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, what do you do with all your strength? And I was like, what do you mean? Like, I didn't think like after college I could, unless you're like going to be a pro athlete, like that I could do anything like this, amateurly compete.
Right.
Like I didn't think like there was like amateur competition that was actually serious. Right. And so for me, like I never had that competitive athletic career that I always wanted. So it was like a way for me to take back what OCD had really taken away from me, was that athletic career, right? And that drive to compete. And I always had that, but I never was able to put it to use.
So you started to reclaim that.
Yeah, it was almost reclaiming of my athletic career 8 years later.
Right.
And so I competed in my first weightlifting competition. I'm like, okay, like they're very technical lifts. Like the snatch and clean and jerk aren't like benching, squat, and deadlifting. Like it's like, it doesn't matter how strong you are at some points. Like you need to have like the technical aspect of it's over and over and over again, like really, really learning it. And so Darren was the first coach that found me. He got me started into it, but unfortunately he moved, to Arizona after like 4 or 5 months, and he handed me off to Sam. So Coach Sam Axton has been the head coach of Avita Weightlifting Club for probably like 5 or 6 years, and that's when it started. Like I started realizing like my potential.
Right.
It was like it took it from like, hey, this is like a hobby to like I was in the gym. I was training 6 times a week, and it was like, hey, like you have the strength, like you squat 400 pounds, but like that doesn't mean anything until you can put it up, but you can put 120 kilos above your head. Like, and obviously I still can't, but like, that's like, what you start realizing that your goals aren't a year out. They're like 5 years out.
Yeah.
And so, I hit a couple local competitions, and like, you start seeing like this progress, and like, they call them the newbie gains, because like, once you start getting some the technical aspects that like down, it's like, all right, like you already have some strength, like you're going to get some serious gains pretty fast. And then obviously you hit plateaus, but that's when I was like, all right, like I really want to I'm really into this. Like this is fun. I've competed 3 times. And then, the past 2 years I've competed like I think 12 times in 2 years, which is a lot.
And you've been very successful.
Right. So, it got to the point where like I think Sam saw how serious I was about it. And so he really pours it. Like I'm going to pour into people that pour into me.
Cool.
And so like he really is like taking a dive into like how I operate mentally, what I do outside the weight room. And like that outside our training center, like, because really it's, you're in there 20% of the time, but then the other 80, it's like, am I sleeping? Am I, eating well? And so, a big question I always ask myself are like, do my actions align with my goals?
Right.
And like, that's when you really start taking it seriously, because like you realize that like, oh, I actually have some potential in this. And then, then I started competing at my first national competition, you medal, and it's like, oh shit, like this is pretty fun. Like,
and not only is this pretty fun, but like I can compete with these guys.
Yeah, it's fun, and it's like a feeling of like, oh wow, like I got something in this. Like, this is cool. And so like now it's like, at first I would come home and my family would be like, do you have to go to the gym today? Now it's like, all right, what time are you training today?
Okay.
Like they're on, like they get it. Like I miss social events for it, because that's like, this is what fills my cup.
Yep.
All right. Like I'm like, that's who I am. Like I'm going to spend 2 hours at our barbell club every day. And then I'm also going to probably do mobility in the morning or at night. Right. Like there's like things that where like now I've tailored my life to like making sure I get everything I need for training.
Yeah.
And everything I need for competition, because, like my coach says, you're not getting any younger. So like you got to ride with it now. Like,
yeah.
And I think my best lifting is probably ahead of me in the next 10 years. But like,
oh, I couldn't agree more.
But like the fact that, you found something, you know what it is? It's like this pursuit of mastery and this pursuit of excellence that like, I always had people like, because I'm never going to make the Olympics. I'm too old. Like 26 is like, you're kind of past your prime, but like also like those numbers are just not within reach. Like, right. You have a 64, I'm an 81, 89 kilogram lifter. You have a 64 kilogram lifter, Hampton Morris, clean jerking 177 kilos. Like, I'm not touching that. Like, okay. like he's unbelievable, and he's like, I can't wait to see him win gold this year in Olympics. But like, that doesn't mean as like a 35-year-old or 40-year-old as a masters athlete, I couldn't compete internationally.
Completely.
Right. And so like, people always ask me like, why do you take it so seriously if you're not going to like be the best ever? Or like, you're not going to go to the Olympics. It's like, okay, like, why do you take your job so seriously if you're never going to be the CEO?
Exactly.
Why do you take your family so seriously?
and I've said this on other podcasts, but what is the alternative?
Right.
Don't take it seriously.
Like, oh, I'm sorry, you just don't have any desire to pursue something greater than yourself.
Totally.
Like,
have some conviction in something.
Right. Yeah. So, and that's where I kind of was like, hey, that's when I learned like not everybody's going to get it.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
and that's okay.
And it's totally okay. And like, I don't need people to get it, but I need the most important people in my life to get it.
Right.
And like, I think when you start showing how much time and effort you're putting into it, they start understanding more.
Yeah.
And so for me, like, Olympic weightlifting really has pushed me to one, like, understand, like, just from like a self-awareness aspect of like how my OCD infiltrates certain areas. It's helped a ton. It's been cool being an athlete with OCD, and being able to highlight those things like in my videos, because like, there's a girl, Joey Sestina, who's a world record bench holder at 19 years old.
I'm familiar with her.
And we just connected, last week, and because she was just diagnosed with OCD 4 months ago, and she's posting about it now. And like, so like being able to like connect with people like that and be like, hey, I've been an athlete for 10 years with OCD. Like, I know what it's like to compete, like, and have OCD take things away from you and have bad training days because OCD took you out of your training. Like, just like school was, tough for me because of OCD. Like, training can be tough for me because all of a sudden, like, you're thrown out of your rhythm because you have an obsessive thought.
Yeah.
And so now I need to learn how to cope with my OCD within training and competition,
right?
And being on a national platform, which is totally different than a regional, right? Like, it's like,
but you've got some tools in your toolkit now,
for sure,
right?
Where I wasn't as equipped in high school.
In the beginning, you're just like, wandering through the dark forest.
You're a deer in headlights.
You have no idea what's going on. Now, at least it's hard, but you've got some weapons to fight it.
100%.
And maybe fight it's not the right word, because I you don't want to fight your OCD,
right.
Maybe, but you have some ways to cope.
For sure.
And I think one area that I think is important to touch on is not only do you do this for yourself, you're actually helping others to become, more physically fit and mentally sound. Can you talk a bit about your coaching? Because as I understand it, this is also part of your mission to serve.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so it started, obviously, I was a college strength coach for a while. I started at Siena as an intern, worked with basketball and lacrosse, swim and dive, and men's, women's tennis. And then went and got my master's at Merrimack. And while I was out at Merrimack, I was working at Tufts. Worked with men's lacrosse there. Shout out Natty Champs this year.
Nice. Congratulations.
Yeah. And my boss there was phenomenal. I mean, those are my two best mentors for sure. And in the strength and conditioning field were Ian and Dan. Ian from Siena and Dan from Tufts. And so worked at Tufts and then was at St. Anselm for a short stint, working with baseball and football there. And then I was at Wagner working football, baseball there. Then I obviously went to Impact, was a director of performance for 2 years there, working mainly with basketball and volleyball. Definitely a few baseball kids too. But what I realized was like, as I was coaching these athletes, and I love the physical development side, and like I'm such a nerd for physiology. I love that stuff. But what I've realized, especially, working with individuals after working with teams, was that these athletes don't have any support on the mental side.
Yeah.
Like they just like, that's not what I've realized is that like to people, like mental performance training is like, has always been kind of like a luxury item and not something they've sought out.
And it's so important.
Right. And so it's so interesting to me because like they seek out the physical stuff, but like they don't seek out the mental stuff. And so like part of my work has been like helping people understand what mental performance training can do for them and how important it is.
Yeah.
And so, it's important to note, like mental performance, what I do is not mental health counseling. It's not counseling.
Yes.
Right. It's not talking about mental health disorders. That's when I refer out, right, to a qualified licensed professional. But mental performance is talking about self-talk. It's talking about building confidence, goal setting, mental imagery, emotional regulation, how you cope with your performance anxiety, communication. Like I'll work with teams and it'll be, how do we communicate better? How do we communicate more effectively with certain individuals? How do I communicate? I'll work with coaches, even like executives of businesses. How do I communicate better with my staff?
Yeah.
Right. Because like that's what the foundation of every good team I've been a part of at the college level, that when I was a strength coach, was every good team was based off of how well they communicate. And that was like the basis of all success.
Even outside of athletics, like even in the business world, relationships, right? Communication, having sound communication skills is like kind of paramount, I would say.
100%. Yeah. Every good relationship I've had was because we could communicate honestly and effectively.
Yep.
And that's kind of one thing, like the book of the 4 Agreements, really, really good read, short read. I read it in February. Obviously we were talking off camera about, my car accident in February and things that happened, kind of how the universe put me in certain places and woke me up a little bit of where I was supposed to be. And I read the 4 Agreements that month, and it was be impeccable with your word.
Yeah.
Is one of the 4 Agreements, and only say what you mean. And like, a lot of times that's where communication really fails, is when people start not saying exactly what they mean and they're just not getting the message clearly out. But I also say, like, I tell, for athletes that deal with tough coaches, like we practice, like, how do we have these conversations and deliver the message in a way that the coach is going to respond in a productive,
important,
a productive manner, right? Because we can't dictate how the person's going to react. Going to react to our message and what we say, but we can control how we deliver the message.
Of course.
All right. And how we deliver the message is probably going to influence how they respond.
Right.
All right. It's this basic human relations 101, right? I'm going to be way more defensive if somebody is criticizing me from like a point of being above me and very directly and what tone they're using.
Right.
Right. It's just like so, and when you think about these things, they're so elementary, but we miss the mark on them all the time. And I know one thing I've worked with dozens of sport coaches now in the college level or the high school level, parents. And what I've seen is like, hey, like, don't forget the ability to have empathy.
Yeah.
Right. And
I think a lot of people forget that these days.
It's crazy. It's crazy to me. Like having empathy is basic humanity 101 and leads to so many more successful outcomes like than people realize.
Yeah. Completely. And I'm grateful you came on here because I feel like in a way, this is like us having empathy for each other. Like,
Right.
It's just nice
100%.
to just sit at a table and have these types of conversations. I don't think people do enough of this these days.
100%.
Yeah. So look, I guess maybe in closing, you've shared your story and the advocacy work you do, and obviously you've had quite a ride. If you could give, I guess, one piece of advice to somebody that might be struggling right now, might not know what's going on in their brain, but know something might be a little off, what would you say?
Don't be afraid to ask for help.
That's most important.
I would say like, I always thought I had all the answers.
Okay.
And, then I got to a point where I thought I was the only one having these thoughts and I still wasn't asking for help and I could have been diagnosed so much sooner and stuff. So I always say, that's what I always lead with is like, hey, like there's so many resources out there and you can control that. Right. And like,
but you can only get them if you ask.
Right. Exactly. Like closed mouths don't get fed. Right. Like, like you gotta be able to go out there and realize like they're not just going to come to you.
No. And it doesn't make you weak.
No, it doesn't. And I think that's the biggest thing is asking for help and being okay with not having all the right answers.
Yeah.
At age 18, at age 20, at age 30, right?
Seriously.
Like 26, like, dude, I don't know shit. Like, bro, like, let's be honest. Like, nobody has the answers.
Yeah.
Like, I was talking to my dad this morning, like, I'm trying to learn how to golf.
Okay. It's hard. Golf's a hard sport.
Dude, when you make contact, man,
it feels good.
Oh, it feels so good. Yeah. He's just learning too. So like, we were kind of we were at the range.
Cool.
And it was funny, man, because like one of my fondest memories of me and my father, after therapy, he would take me to the Sasco. And it was usually like during the day, during like school hours.
Yeah.
So like he would come home from work. He would take me, it would either him or my mom, but me and my mom would take me like to go get something to eat after therapy. And my dad, he would take my dog to the beach and we would skip rocks.
Really?
And it was like super like just unplugged, like, but it was like kind of random because my dad's not like this soft, like, he has empathy, but like he's a man. Like he's just like generational, and he showed a side of him that I didn't really ever see up until that point. Yeah. But as I was hitting golf balls today, it was like I'm having like deja vu, except we're hitting golf balls instead of and
look at where you are now.
But it was like so cool because it was like 10 years later.
Wow.
It was so cool. But he was like, dude, like I just turned 60 and I don't have all the answers. Like we're all just trying to figure this out.
Dude, you look at me right now. I have this podcast for those listening. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing.
Right.
I'm just figuring it out.
Right.
But I'm having fun.
Right.
And this feels good.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
And I think, as we said, we need to have more of these conversations. And I couldn't thank you more for having one with me today.
Yeah, of course, man.
So,
thanks for having me.
Thanks again, brother. It's been a pleasure. And I say this at almost every episode, but if the listeners want one, we'll have a round two for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, brother.
Appreciate you.
Appreciate you, man.